Oh, welcome to YOUCANIC. In this video we're going to go over Mercedes mild hybrid system. So this system is installed in vehicles such like the S-Class, the S400. So right here we have a S400 2010. We are working on this. It will not start. We've had other cars, S400s, where we have had to repair. So we want to do a little bit of an overview of what really goes wrong with these cars, what to keep in mind, some tips if you're actually working on them. One thing to point out is that if you are working on this system, so you need to know what you're doing. You need to disable the hybrid system. It's a high voltage 120, so you can see all these cables right here. They're high voltage cables, and if you do touch them accidentally with your wrench or hands, you can get seriously injured. So besides that, let's get started first with the power electronic module. So right here we have power electronic module. We have taken this apart. This is a very common failure. This part fails quite often, and it is expensive. It's around 5,000–6,000 buying it from the dealership, and that's another 5,000 to put it in at the dealership. But you know, if you can find these aftermarket for around $2,000 to $3,000, and it'll cost another one to two to put it in. It is a little bit time consuming, and we have another guide on how to replace this part, so look in the description for that guide. Now, what goes wrong with this? So this part, the power electronic module, triggers two specific codes. Those are both U codes. They start with U. We have them in the description below. Those two codes, they always, or most of the time, they point to a faulty power electronic module. So let's take a look. This has been taken apart, and so as you can see here, this the circuit there is totally blown out, and then the circuit board that actually goes on top of this, there's a couple of circuit boards that go over this. They are also on the bottom. This is damaged. You got to be careful here. We have you have 1, 2, 3 capacitors. These don't go bad quite as often. These are high voltage capacitors, so you got to be careful. You got to make sure you discharge those before you touch them or anything like that. But this right here is what actually fails quite a bit on these vehicles. Now, this is not the only S400 that we worked with actually replaced. We have another module right there that you can see. We're just testing it with the vehicle, but for diagnostic purposes. But this part is what actually fails quite a bit. We've seen quite a few of these cars with a bad power electronic module. Whether it's people who just contact us, it's people who we see online on forums, and also we see these cars running through auctions all the time, and a lot of times, half of the time actually, they are not running, and it's usually because of this issue. So let's take a look though what you can do with the scanner. We're going to take a look at that, and some tips on what else could go wrong. Other things that could go wrong with this is because this runs on CAN bus network, the hybrid battery over here could go bad. So right here we have the hybrid battery, and in order to charge this battery, if this battery is under 15% charge, remember this is a 120 volt battery, right? But it has to be over 15% charge for it to crank the engine, because this car does not have a starter. It's the electric motor right between the transmission there and the engine. That is what serves as a starter. So if this is under 15% capacity, then it's not going to charge. It's not going to start the engine. So you need to charge this battery, and the way this battery, high voltage battery, is charged, you have the you need a 12 volt charger, but it needs to be putting about 80 amps or even more. And then you would connect it to right here. You have the positive. This is where you jump start the car, right? And then over here you have the negative, or the ground. So you would connect something right there. You connect the negative there and the positive over here, and turn on the ignition. And then once you turn on the ignition, then you'd have to leave it on for the hybrid battery to charge. Now sometimes the hybrid battery might not charge, and the reason is because you have a what's called a DC to DC converter. What that does is converts 12 volt DC to about 120 volt DC, high voltage, to charge the battery. So right underneath the fender here on the passenger side, we have the DC to DC converter, and you can see that right there. You can see the positive. This is 12 volt positive. This is the high voltage line that goes to the battery, and that's the electrical connector. So these can go bad as well. So especially if your battery is not charging, you might have an issue with this. Now there is one other part that is part of the hybrid system, and that is the AC compressor. So in this vehicle, the AC compressor runs off of high voltage, and the reason why that is because the refrigerant will come into the high voltage battery, and it will cool the battery even when the engine is stopped. So like if you stop at the light and the engine auto on off, you know, turns off the engine, well, you still need to cool this battery here. So you have that. The problem is that if there is a problem with that AC compressor, it will interfere in the CAN bus network, and then it will take down the whole high voltage network. One other thing to keep in mind is right here you have a fuse that connects from here to the high voltage battery. So that fuse, based on the diagram, it protects only the AC compressor over there. These two wires, two go to the power electronic module down here on the side, and two go over there, but the fuse only protects the AC compressor. Now if the fuse does blow, it will trigger a code for open interlock circuit, so the system actually will get disabled with that fuse over there. Even though it's only for the AC, this computer will monitor all of them, and if any of them are turned off, it will prevent engine from starting. Let's take a look at how to diagnose Mercedes hybrid systems. For this step, you will need a scanner that's able to get into the various control modules. Not only do you want to be able to read codes and clear them, but you also need a scanner that's more advanced, so that you will be able to carry out some tests. And let's take a look at what you want to test and what values you want to look at when testing this. So right here we have the scanner connected to the vehicle, and we're gonna look at what you want to read, which modules you want to go read codes and do some tests here. So the first one you want to check is the engine control module. You connect to that. Here we're just looking at the codes, read full codes, and then you can see here we have a few codes. One of them is charge level of the high voltage battery is low, and with that you will not be able to start the vehicle. So you have hybrid CAN bus is off. That's a stored code, but there's two codes that currently are not shown here that point to the bad power electronic module. We will have those two codes in the description because we have connected a good power electronic module right now. So that is you're gonna look up for those two codes and come here and look at some actual data, but there's a better place to look for data for the hybrid system. Now here is the next thing you want to check, the SGEM. It's called electronic motor control unit, but what this is, it's actually this is the part right here, this power electronic module that we ran over earlier that fails right here. This is what that control module is, electronic motor control unit. Now if it has blown, if it's bad and it's because of this damage right here, you will still be able to access it. You would be able to read codes, and you'll see the two codes in here. They'll say current. If they're stored, you can clear them. You would come here and you can read data stream. You can you have a few sensors here that you can just go and look values from. We're not gonna spend too much time with here. So let's go back, and then you can do actuation tests. You can reset this part. Now when you do replace this control module, the good thing is that at least on the W221 chassis, you don't have to program it. It's just really, you don't need to code the VIN or anything like that. You will need to just connect and clear codes if there's any stored codes, but besides that, there isn't any programming like there is with, for example, with the ECU or the TCU in these cars. You need to match the VIN and do that. You don't have to do it with this. It's pretty easy in that aspect as far as programming goes. Now here is one that's also important, and that's SGBMS battery management system, and this has to do with a hybrid battery. And here you can check the voltage of each of the cells. Like you can check the status of the hybrid battery. You can see control unit high voltage has performance system shutdown. You can clear that code, but here we have a couple of codes, and these need to be addressed. So the charge level of the high voltage battery is low. So like we mentioned earlier, you would connect a 12 volt 80 amp charger to the jump terminals on the engine bay. You turn on the ignition and you look and wait for that battery to charge. You need to be at least 15% capacity. Ideally, if it's charging, let it charge to around 30%. It's going to take a few hours, but you just have to do that. Now the second code is the interlock circuit of the high voltage onboard electrical system has a sporadic malfunction, and the reason why that is because we're connected to this power electronic module that's actually only with the cable there for the ECU, but we are not connecting. We haven't connected these high voltage here, and again, you got to be careful with this. If you don't know what you're doing, you could get seriously injured. This is a high voltage system right here. Right now we don't have any high voltage coming in because the cable is still down there, but right here you can see this little connector. You can see right here, you can see that, and there's a connector that goes in there. If that connector is off, you're gonna have this code right here. The interlock circuit of the high voltage onboard electrical system has a sporadic malfunction. Now that could also be because your fuse is blown there right on top of the transmission, right on that box, black box there for where the orange cables connect. You just disconnect it at the AC of the hybrid battery or down at the power electronic module. So that's what that typically is. The charge level now, here let's take a look, and because sometimes you might connect the charger, but the battery keeps going down, and the reason it could be because the DC to DC converter that we looked at earlier, that's right below the fender down there, might be faulty. So there's few things that you can check, and you can check if the DC to DC converter is actually charging the battery. So you can see charge level high voltage battery 0, amperage high voltage battery 0. Status of the contractors. So here is one way to tell if the high voltage battery is charging. If you look at status of the contractors, think of that as like a switch turning on and off the high voltage battery. If it says open, its switch is open, you're not actually charging, there's no current going to the high voltage battery. So right now, even if we have a charger connected, it's not taking a charge. So there's another way to check that. Let's go to read data stream. Actually, we're gonna go to DC to DC converter. Okay, and then we're gonna do to read data stream. So here you can see operating state, it's passive. So what that means, if it's passive, it means the DC to DC converter is not charging the hybrid battery. So it should say active when there is a charge. And then you can see here the voltage of high voltage electrical system is 0. It needs to be like 120, or you know, it needs to be between 48 volts and around 150, 160, basically on that range. So it's 0, so it's not charging right now. Let's take a look though, because there is one way to charge the hybrid battery even if the system, you know, is refusing to. So first you want to clear the codes, and then next you want to go to battery management system. So we're connecting basically to the high voltage battery, and then we will go down to actuation test. And once you do that, you go to actuation of contractor. So what you're basically doing here, you're turning that switch on and off manually. So you'd come here, you press F4, but it's probably will refuse because there is an issue with this high voltage system, so it's just refusing to turn on, so the high voltage battery. But if we clear the code, we didn't have any other issues, then it will change here from status of contractors from open to closed, and then you would see the high voltage battery charging. You'll see amperage going into. Now the same steps and the same concepts, basically the same modules you'll see even on a Mercedes star diagnostic scanner or other advanced scanners that can do bidirectional communication. You would see basically the same menu, and you should see most of these tests. But that's it. These hybrids, they can be tricky to diagnose. Unfortunately, there isn't that many trained technicians that work on these cars, and even if you take this to a dealership, because of the high voltage risks, you're not going to have every Mercedes tech be able to work on these. Certain techs are able and trained to work on these hybrid high voltage systems. One thing to keep in mind is that if any of these, the power electronic module fails, if the high voltage battery fails, or if the AC compressor fails or has an issue, basically, and the DC to DC converter, they're all connected, and any issue with any of the systems is going to trigger like CAN bus faults, and it's going to take the whole system down. So it's that's one thing to keep in mind. Now another problem with these is that the high voltage battery, of course, can, you know, go bad, and that is actually pretty expensive.